Welcome to the first episode of Inspired Content for the year of 2017. This is the first book, and I've chosen The Last Hot Summer by John M. Ford. I'll see you on the other side. Taking a look at the last hot time. This was kind of infuriating as a book. I'm gonna give it a 6.2 out of a 6.8. It had things in it that I was kind of interested in, and it would be nice to explore. It's written where like all the things of any real meaning are done off screen and not explained any further. The whole time I read this, I felt like it was fan fiction about a series that I don't know anything about. So I'm not in on the jokes, I'm not in on the world building that's done somewhere else, that it's not in here. And there are things that just happen in the story that there's no explanation. And it's the character that you're supposed to be following. He gets into situations where he wants an explanation and he starts to ask about it, and somebody starts to talk to him about it, but they never answer it, but he suddenly gets it, but he never tells you what it is. So it drove me a little crazy. And I feel like this was told to people around me, and I heard it as it was being told, but it's not being told to me. And I feel like I'm being left out of this. And it's a really kind of a frustrating way to read a book. And it shouldn't be that way. I have no difficulty with fantasy, science fiction. I've read urban fantasy as well, and it missed me. It was clearly like walking in halfway through a movie and not understanding what's going on, and nobody bothers to explain it to you. So it's unfortunate that was the way the book was, but moving past that, ideas of what I could do with some of the ideas and inspirations from this book, starting with basically, despite all the confusion of this book here, I do like the idea of like elves returning to the world and being fascinated by our pop culture in some way, that they bring about kind of aspects of that pop culture that haven't existed for a while, or things like that. In this case, in my mind, I think it would be kind of fun to do a setting where elves have returned and are fascinated by superhero comic books. So I can imagine the returning elves using some of those elements to become like costumed superheroes, and making artifacts that allow some humans to act as superheroes. And so it's just kind of like this mashup of like fantasy and superhero stories. A person who might be remote controlled with a spell, like a puppet almost, by somebody to try to do some evil task with them. And during the breaking of that spell link, the recoil kind of shatters both people and mixes them together, both physically and mentally. So you have somebody who doesn't know which one they are, and it's almost indistinguishable which is which. They have two very different personalities, but they're mixed and matched pieces of each. And so neither of them knows who is the villain and who is the victim used for villainy, and at what point does it matter, and exploring what that means from the perspective of one of those characters, trying to figure out who they are, and then maybe just coming to peace with trying to have to figure out how to be somebody new and different. Giving up on trying to be one or the other, the people involved in the original thing, and just figuring out who they could be now, and what memories they hold about what pieces of past from both people mean about who they can be from now on. Do they abandon both set of memories, stick to one, believing themselves to be that person, or do they just kind of are they haunted by things they may never have done? And so it would be an interesting character story to do an exploration of how you recover from losing who you are and wondering if you're somebody else now. I mean, the main character in this book seems sort of like a Boy Scout in kind of a position of working for the mafia, but he doesn't compromise being good for getting too enmeshed in the bad. And it made me wonder, looking at some of the situations, there's sort of a story element that I've experienced in the past which can kind of be layered into some of this, but it seems like the mafia in this one was still like the good mafia as they were playing at it. And so they did a fairly good job of sort of glazing over that maybe they do things that aren't necessarily what we would like them to be doing. But I think a better way to go for a story in this vein of thought, for me at least, is kind of having a story of like an angel who is on our world. Maybe heaven has fallen and hell has risen, and we're all kind of stuck on the same planet now. And you have this angel who is working with an organization of demons, with the full knowledge that demons they can do some very terrible things. But now that neither of them are working for heaven or hell, but instead everybody's just trying to make the world a survivable place, that sometimes to make a good course happen, bad things need to be done to make it go. And so sometimes you need a monster to deal with situations that require somebody cold and heartless to do them. And so, like, having that angel who can walk that line and work with demons to make the world a place where people can survive and thrive. That would be I'm not sure I'm up for that story. I'm not big on the fallen angels and risen demons and that kind of thing, but I think as a story element I might play with something like that. I was kind of hoping that at one point the Doctor would have power that was granted to him before this moment when he was confronting a bad person. He was granted a certain power which I guess I misunderstood. I was half expecting him to be able to bind the bad person to him. So it's sort of like taking a monster who's out to destroy you, and suddenly they have no choice but to be your bodyguard. And that idea, I was kind of pulling for that to happen, and it didn't happen. But a good Samaritan on their way through magical being infested territory has to stop and help an injured or dying mystical being. And in doing so, they get blood on them, and that blood causes an affliction. So it's something that people aren't out to go do to themselves because of problems it would cause. But aside from the affliction that the Good Samaritan is going to struggle with, the condition also bestows certain advantages in dealing with mystical things. Either it's an invulnerability to any spot that was splashed with blood, or sort of like a heat or cold generation, some sort of mystical ability that gives them an advantage but also is a part of their affliction. And so it's not something anybody wants, but it's something this character can end up using in the course of a story. Okay, this story takes place in a world in which sort of elven realms had retreated from Earth in some way, and now they've come back, and in doing so, when they emerged, they kind of crushed the cities. Well, not really crushed, but sort of set fire to the cities that they appeared over. And I guess there's implication that there was a war as a result. And in my mind, what I want to think of more is along the lines of unintentionally a realm of mystical beings reflowers and starts to regrow into our world without realizing the damage they're doing to human civilization. And so it's sort of like a societal collapse and infrastructure destroyed as the world is growing gradually more monstrous around them, and people are pulling back and fleeing rather than being caught in the infection of it all. And then they're slowly forced tighter and tighter, and then have to flee Earth altogether and go into orbital colonies trying to survive and maintain humanity. And once the entire world is taken over, there's a sort of a conflict, orbital bombardment, that kind of thing. And then you have a point where the war comes to an end, and there are sort of neutral zones on the Earth that, science fiction, space colony humans and fantasy elves have to work together in these cities that are resettled by humans and fantasy creatures. And I think it would be an interesting setting to work in, and I do think I'm going to dabble with some story elements and that kind of idea and see what I can do with it. It's not really fully fleshed out now. I have to work out some of the details. I may not go elves necessarily as just general fantasy races, but those are some of the ideas I got from this one. Hopefully there's some inspiration, and I'd love to hear if people have some story ideas, artworks, or other things they can come up with for some of these ideas. And I'll see you for the next episode.